Well, first of all, thanks for having me here this evening. It's a privilege to get to talk to you guys about these important issues. My name is Parish. I went to high school here in the Atlanta area, and I even attended Georgia State for a couple semesters.
Woo!
That's right, go Panthers, man. I wasn't raised as a Christian, and I was educated in state schools and colleges. My friends and acquaintances had similar backgrounds and shared similar conceptions about the world. We held similar worldviews. As a result, I was rarely challenged on my most basic beliefs about life, beliefs regarding purpose, knowledge, and authority. If our knowledge can be likened to a house, then these, our most basic beliefs, can be said to be the foundation of that house. I never assessed this foundation, but assumed it was sound and in fit working condition, simply because I knew others who had similar outlooks. One day it was suggested that this foundation was cracked, in disrepair, and that my foundation amounted to a cluttered, disjointed, and arbitrary bits of experience. It was said that the reason for this defective condition was not a result of the materials I had used in building the foundation, but a result of the ground upon which the foundation had been built. The ground was said to be unstable, shifty, and even dangerous. At the time, I dismissed this assessment as foolish, for I did not want to think of the cost of building a new foundation, much less the cost of relocating a lifetimes of beliefs, perhaps to some unfamiliar land. But I could not shake the thought that my house might fall. So one day, I determined to inspect the foundation, and if it was in fact faulty, I committed to rebuild the house no matter what the cost, and if necessary, relocate to solid ground. And this is the reason why I'm speaking to you this evening and the focus of my presentation. What's your worldview? So, let's define a worldview then. We heard some talk about that earlier. A worldview basically then can be defined as a network of one's most basic beliefs about reality, which all observations are interpreted. Okay, so some important elements of this definition now is that a worldview consists of multiple interdependent beliefs. Okay, and that's what's behind this idea of network. Okay, so secondly, these beliefs are basic, which means that they are foundational to other beliefs. And then third, these beliefs are used to interpret reality. So they are essential beliefs, and they are ultimate beliefs. Okay. So then, what kind of questions do worldview seek to answer? They seek to answer life's most basic questions, questions about purpose, knowledge, and authority. These are three categories that we can use. And these map to philosophical categories, such as metaphysics, meaning, and ethics. So let's look at this first one. Purpose. So one of the questions you might ask in this worldview is there purpose, and why are we here? Okay, knowledge. Worldview seeks to answer this. What do we know, and what are the justifications for knowledge? How do we know the things that we claim to know? And then thirdly, authority. One of the questions might be in this category: does God exist? And then for us, we say, what is my ultimate authority? We all have authorities that we hold our beliefs on, and so we have to ask ourselves, what is that standard that we make these determinations? So we could say, what is my authority? So let's give some illustrations then, just basically of some worldview ideas. So in this first one, we call it psychic hotline. And so this is in the category here of knowledge. So a neighbor tells you that he's going to be moving to the Caribbean next week as he's about to become rich. When you ask how he made these riches, he informs you that he visited a psychic and was given the winning numbers to next week's lottery. So in this illustration, psychic hotline, this person has a worldview that accepts that knowledge gained from paranormal sources, such as psychics knowing the future, is legitimate, and it's even an acceptable way to actually get knowledge. That's the free will. Illustration number 2, sensible. So this one is regarding purpose. So while at the airport, and I'll just say this for this example, this actually happened to me when I was about your age. I was in the airport in Chicago for 12 hours, and as I was there waiting, someone came up and actually told me about this, and this is a little bit of biographical information. But while at the airport, you are solicited by a believer in yogic transcendental meditation. He informs you that all sense perception is an illusion, and that what you must do to break the perpetual cycle of reincarnation is to listen for the sound of one hand clapping in order that you might climb the ladder of being. Okay, so in this illustration, this person has a worldview which holds that purpose and meaning is ultimately found in the denial of all sense perception in an attempt to lift oneself to a higher form of being. So, what's the purpose of these illustrations? I mean, aside from the fact that these might seem odd to us, right? They highlight the aspects of every worldview. How we know what we know in case of knowledge here in psychic outline, and what is ultimate purpose in the case here of sensible. Okay, so then we can say, what are some of the characteristics then of these worldview beliefs? Let's see if we can look further into this. One, these beliefs are universal. They're commonly held. So, what does that mean, universal? That means that everyone, doesn't matter who, assuming normal brain capacity and functioning, everyone has a worldview. These are foundational beliefs. That's what universal is. That's the universal aspect of it. Secondly, these beliefs are presupposed. I mean, they're basic beliefs. So, these beliefs are also referred to as presuppositions. They are essential for meaning. They are basic and assumed. That's what's behind this presupposed. They must be assumed. And we'll look at this further. I'm not clear on why that is. Thirdly, these beliefs hold a privileged status in our thinking. That's what it means here. What's behind this notion of tightly held. Okay? These beliefs or these presuppositions have that privileged status, making them the least negotiable beliefs, which means that they are not easily given up. That's what's behind this tightly held. People do not easily give up these beliefs. And fourthly, we say that these beliefs are legislative and experience is interpreted by them. What does that mean, legislative? Well, that means that they are held prior to any examination of facts, because all facts of experience are actually interpreted by these beliefs. This makes other beliefs dependent upon them and determined by them. And that's what's behind this understanding here of their legislative nature. They dictate to other beliefs that you have what you will even accept as evidence or fact. Okay. So let's give some examples then. I've made this claim here that we have beliefs that are presupposed, universal, and others, and that they are called presuppositions. And so, and we've said in our definition then that these presuppositions are a network of beliefs. And so that's kind of what is illustrated here in this diagram. We have these circles representing beliefs, and then the lines between them radiating out. That's the notion here of the network. And so here in the middle, the center circle, we're going to look at some of these, and these are these presupposed beliefs, these presuppositions. And what's one of those? Well, the first one is the laws of logic, or is known as the laws of thought. And as I just displayed this, we see some other beliefs coming up. This is that idea too. These interdependent beliefs and other beliefs coming from these presuppositions. So laws of logic, these are the most basic propositions of logical thought. For example, the law of non-contradiction. Law of non-contradiction tells us the statement that I am both giving this presentation and I am not giving this presentation in the same time and in the same manner tells us that that statement itself is false. Okay, what else? What's another presupposition? Personal freedom. So now, again, as I've brought this other presupposition on the screen, we've seen some more beliefs now that are coming up out from that. Okay? So in regard to personal freedom and responsibility, we ask, are our choices real or are they forced? Do we have a mind and a will so that we are responsible for our actions, thoughts, choices? If we have no ability to choose, then our actions are forced and we are ultimately not responsible for them. So that's what's going on here behind this presupposition of freedom, freedom to choose, freedom to think. You're all in classes right now, you're asked to do things, you're asked to think about papers and assignments and determine the validity of certain propositions, certain theses, right? And that's what you do when you write a paper or when you examine something. So freedom is presupposed in that you actually have the freedom to make up your mind and determine these things. Finally, we'll look at here authority. Now, you see the whole diagram here. Now, this doesn't constitute the entire spectrum of our beliefs, but this is just a sampling of some of these. So we can see here that as we have these presuppositions, we have these other beliefs that come out from that. So, and these are interdependent, so that you have rationality, and with rationality you have truth. And then with truth you have concepts such as law and justice and even love. And with the senses we have science. And with the freedom we have notions like liberty. These are things all go together. You can't pull these out in isolation one from another. In order to have any of these, you must have these together, these presuppositions holding them and being the foundation of these. So, with authority then, we have an ultimate standard we use for determining right and wrong. Truth versus error, love against hate. Authority has the notion of justice tied to it. So again, we have authority here, justice, and we have concepts like law and love. So let's look again at another illustration here. And we have here a difference of worldviews. And so for this, I'm going to use two to represent this with two people. So Kirby and Kim, and we're going to look at the difference of worldviews here. So on purpose, Kirby says, we are here by luck, time plus chance, and not God. And Kim says, for purpose, we were created by God and in His image. Okay? On knowledge, Kirby says that knowledge is sketchy and we just can't know anything for sure. On knowledge, Kim says knowledge is actually true, justified belief, but most importantly, that it's accessible to us. We can actually come in contact with and know things for certain. And then on personal freedom, Kirby says that our actions are determined by our survival program. And Kim holds in that same category that we are responsible for our actions, which we choose. On authority and justice, Kirby says if we don't get caught, we won't stand trial. And Kim says we will give an account for all of our thoughts, words, and deeds. So the question then is, we've just seen that these two people have worldviews that are completely antithetical, right? They are polar opposites. In fact, maybe some people in this room have similar positions like this, and they are completely 180 degrees apart. So then the question we have to ask is, how is that possible? How do people, and let's assume that they have the same kind of mental capabilities, the same kind of sensory capabilities, the same access to information in the world, how do they come to such different conclusions? Well, so we say, what's the difference then between Kirby and Kim? They have radically opposed answers to life's most basic questions. Do they then, as a question, have different sets of facts which they are processing? Well, in his article, The Heart of the Matter, Dr. Greg Monson gives us insight into this issue. And he writes, if a dispute arises over the price of eggs at the store, we can jump in the car, drive down to the market, and go look for ourselves at the price listed on the eggs. In such cases, it seems that what we do at base is look and see if one hypothesis or its opposite is true. Of course, disagreements such as these can be readily resolved in this fashion only because the two people who disagree nevertheless agree with each other regarding more basic assumptions, such as the reliability of their senses, the uniformity of natural events, the possibility of knowledge, and the honesty of researchers. However, when the dispute is over more fundamental issues, Simple appeals to observational evidence need not be decisive at all. The reason is that a person's most fundamental beliefs or presuppositions determine what he or she will accept as evidence and determine how that evidence will be interpreted. So what Dr. Bonson's just saying here is this. Two people can look at the same sets of facts and come to completely different conclusions. And the reason that they can do that is because of these presuppositions, these worldviews, the things that they hold most ultimate and believe about the nature of reality. Those legislate and determine what it is that you ultimately will see, regard the facts as, and certainly when it's in regard to more ultimate questions about reality. Okay. So let's look at someone else's worldview. In this case, we're going to look at the worldview of Jesus. It's given us in the Bible. And so we're going to see how he answers some of these questions and what he thought. So, first category here, when we talked about authority, does God exist? Jesus believed that God exists, in John 3:16, among other places, and he believed that God exists as Father, Son, and Spirit. On purpose, in John 17:3, Jesus said, "And this is the way to have eternal life, to know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, the one you sent to earth." Okay, in regard to knowledge, what did Jesus think about that one? In John 17:17, he said, "Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth." So Jesus says that truth is God's very word, and that his disciples are to be set apart, sanctified in that truth. Also in knowledge, John 5:39, Jesus said, "You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. And it is they that bear witness about me." So Jesus claimed that the scriptures, God's written word to man, one, provides knowledge of eternal life, and two, bears witness about him. These are claims to knowledge that he made. Okay, and another one on knowledge. Jesus claimed and said that scripture cannot be broken, John 10:35. So here, Jesus claims to have knowledge extending beyond his own personal experience of his life. In fact, he claimed to know that all of Scripture, which includes history of the past, present, and future, so well and so certain, he claimed that it could not be broken. Okay? This is knowledge he's claiming to say that can't be broken, which he has not experienced himself directly. Events of past history, present history, and of future history. And not only is he saying it's true, he's saying it's so true, and I know so well, that none of it can be broken. All right? On authority. Jesus said this on authority, Matthew 12:30, "Whoever is not for me is against me." So here he claims to know the hearts of people in such a way to know that anyone who is not for him, which is trusting in him, is against him. He removes agnosticism as a possible belief category. And then finally, John 12:48, he said, "The one who rejects me and does not receive my words has a judge. The word that I have spoken will judge him on the last day." So Jesus says that there will be ultimate justice on the last day. And the standard, the authority that will be used to justify or condemn, is the very scripture he said, testified of him, in which he said could not be broken. All right, then. So we've looked at some different worldviews. We've had different illustrations. We've looked at the different categories and things that constitute worldviews. We've seen that they're foundational beliefs. And so we have a lot of questions about that. So then the question becomes, well, so how do we choose a worldview? Right? What should be our criterion for choosing our worldview? In the vast marketplace of ideas and belief systems and confessions and creeds, how do we choose the proper one? That's naturally the question. Well, let me suggest that, first of all, a true worldview must provide a sure foundation. Right? A true worldview needs to make sense of reality, it needs to answer these basic questions, and it needs to do so in a certain and sure fashion. Matthew 7, Jesus said, "Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain fell and the floods came, And the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. So, said that a true worldview must provide a foundation for making life comprehensible or intelligible. True worldview must account for presuppositions such as laws of thought, universals, the reliability of memory, human freedom, and a basis for making determinations of right and wrong, and ultimately truths. A true worldview must be one which can be lived and lived as consistently as possible. So, the worldview that I'm up here advocating and talking to you today about, basically Scripture, is the Christian worldview. And the Christian worldview, at base, and most basically, is simply this. It's the belief in Jesus' word as the ultimate authority. The sure foundation described here in Matthew 7, which the man builds upon his life upon. The Christian takes Jesus at his word, believing he is who he claimed to be, the sovereign Lord, and the only one who can, will, and does ensure the house will never fall. So, finally then, say here, what's your worldview? If you've never examined the foundation of your most basic beliefs and critically assessed them, then I encourage you to do so. It's because ultimately, our foundational beliefs determine the condition of our existence. Not only in this life, but according to Jesus, they will determine the state and the place of our eternal one. And so, that's it for the presentation for this evening. So, anybody wanted to ask any questions about worldview or anything else, or look at some other worldviews? I want to just give you a brief overview here of what it is and not go too far into technicalities of what some of the more philosophical aspects are of worldview and knowledge. But, yeah.
So what you're saying is that when people are trying to find out the truth about like what the price of eggs are,
Yes.
then that's easy, and so people are able to. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so what Dr. Bonson is saying there is that when you have a dispute over something that is basic, that you share common assumptions about, okay? Such as, so every day that we go and we do things, like for example, go get eggs, we go to the grocery store. When we go, we have to assume many different things in order to do that, right? We have to assume that the place where we got the eggs yesterday is still in the same location, okay? That there's a uniformity between the events that happened yesterday and today, okay? We have to assume that our senses are reliable, that we can still go down there and we can do an eyeball inspection, right? That those senses, that we can process and we can look at things, and that our minds will interpret that information, and it's going to work in a consistent fashion, okay? We assume these things. We don't stop to say, is my mind still working properly the same way as it was yesterday? Are the laws of physics still in such a state that I can even walk down to the store? Do I know that the researchers, the people who have priced the eggs, have done so, and today they've decided that they're going to price gouge on the eggs, and they've basically done it, pricing the eggs based on market conditions and whatnot. There's a whole host of beliefs that we have that we assume every single day that we don't analyze. But when we share, and it's something basic, like the question of dispute over something like this, like how many people are in this room? Well, you know, I assume these beliefs with most of you all, right? That we can use our eyes and we can look around the room and we can count and we can do a head count to see how many people are. So when it's a question of basic sort like that, then we share a common agreement. However, when the question arises over something like this, you know, is abortion, right, a right for all people? Or do you think that abortion signifies something else, such as the taking of a life? When it's over a more ultimate question like that, then different standards of authority are used to answer that question. If you believe, as in the example there, that Kirby believed, that all we are made up of is matter and motion, and that our actions really have no consequences other than what it is that, how they affect us, and they've got some cash value, meaning that they're pragmatic. Well, look, if you've got a baby and you're in college and you know, like you want to have a career, then that might be difficult for you to go out and get that career, because how are you going to manage that baby? So as a pragmatic solution, just get rid of it, right? Now, if you think that you're matter in motion, and you think that these things really have no consequences, then that belief would certainly make sense to you in that way. Yeah, that's going to stop you from getting maybe a high-paying job or going to do the career that you want. You're not going to be able to manage all these things. However, if you're like Kim and you say, that's not how we determine a question like that. The way we determine that is, what is that life? Is it just matter in motion, or does it have some purpose behind it? Was a purpose given to you in having that baby? And are all of our decisions to be made on the basis of your feelings, the basis of your felt needs? You're looking at the circumstances as they exist today and not looking at them long term and what that can mean for you in the future. Of course, if you believe that your actions have no meaning for the future, then of course you're going to answer that question differently than somebody says, our actions today ultimately will have a final basis and determination. And not only by myself, but some authority outside of myself who's going to determine all of these standards of right and wrong. So that's what he's trying to talk about there, about
highly held beliefs as a type of
about more ultimate questions about life, okay? And that's what these basic worldview questions try to answer, like we've said there, about authority, about purpose. If you believe that we're here by time and chance, and that there is ultimately, if you keep pushing the ball back, and you keep, why are you guys here in this room tonight? Well, maybe some of you saw Mike's flyer. Okay, why did you respond to the flyer? Well, because I didn't have anything to do at this time. Well, you know, why didn't you have anything to do at this time? Well, because I didn't go to this. I mean, I keep pushing you back and back and back and back and back, right? And ultimately, I want to know, why are you even here at this school? And then you say, well, I want to get a better job because I want to be able to earn money and I want to get a house. Well, why do you want to get a house? You see, just keep pushing it all back. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you can say, well, ultimately, it's all based on time and chance. And I am just a cosmic copying mistake, a mutation, simply, that really has no basis for any purpose at all other than I'm just lucky to be here. A squirrel and a nut are lucky enough to get together at the end of the day, right? Yeah. And that's essentially what I am, okay? So, there's a difference there. And so that's what we're talking about, ultimate questions. Anybody else?
I know you got one, Mike.
Well, I can kind of play devil's advocate here just to get the ball rolling, if it can bring out some more questions. But if I was going to say, well, I don't believe in God, but I believe I have sense perception. I don't have any problem going to the store and looking and seeing what the price of eggs are. I can do that every day this week, and that works out well. I can work a job every day. I can study things. I can look at the world. I can come to conclusions. I can look at logic. Everything works out fine for me, but I just don't believe in God. So why can't my worldview be valid when I can answer all the same things that you're proposing?
Well, you've just given one example there of sense perception. You just told me that you have it. But then the question I would have is, why do you believe that your sense perception is reliable? What is your justification? So if our beliefs need to have justifications, right? So we all assume that our beliefs need to have justifications, right? I mean, you guys take exams still in college, don't you? Yeah, you write papers, right? What justification do they have to grade you? I mean, how do they determine how to give you a grade? At the end of the day, they need to have some standard in order to be able to determine what makes an A paper. They still give A's and B's, I don't know. A paper and give these gradings out, right? Like they have some standard and basis to do that. And so that's called justification. So if our beliefs need justification, then the belief that, okay, I will grant you that you have senses, because I'm hearing you speak after you see me. But the question is, why do you think that there are reliable guides telling you ultimately what the nature of the world is, right? And that is just one on sense perception. When I ask you something about what is purpose or what is meaning, then what is your justification for meaning that in a world that, is just, I guess, matter and motion? I mean, I don't know. I think Kirby's representation there of time plus chance equals everything would say to me then, well, let me just quote to you here. I won't put it in my words. I have it here at the end of my slides. Dr. Alex Rosenberg, he's a professor of philosophy at Duke University. He is the R. Taylor Cole, he holds that distinction as the R. Taylor Cole Professor of Philosophy at Duke. And he wrote in his book, The Atheist Guide to Reality, he answers some of these questions, and he's one of the most consistent atheists that I've read on this. He considers himself to be a scientist, which is nothing more than empiricism as a worldview. So first of all, he asks this worldview question: what is the meaning of life? There is none. What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Just as I put there in Kirby. Is there free will? Not a chance. What's the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There is no difference between them. Why should I be moral? Because it makes you feel better. So, these are just some of the things. What is love, and how can we find it? Love is a solution to a strategic interaction problem. Does history have any meaning or purpose? It's full of sound and fury, but signifies nothing. Does the human past have any lessons for the future? So does history tell us anything at all? And this is the professor of philosophy, one of the professors of philosophy at Duke University. Fewer and fewer if it had anything to begin with. So I would suggest to you all that if you're thinking of transferring from Georgia State, you might want to go to Dr. Rosenberg's class. This would be a perfect class for you to be in, because there is no meaning, there is no standard, there is none of these things. Anytime you are in that class taking an exam, you are free to copy off others. You are free to hand in homework lifted off Google, or whatever it might be, because if there's no standards, for meaning, and if there is no purpose, how can Dr. Rosenberg judge you to determine your grade, to tell you that it's improper for you because you're making some strategic interaction decision here because you just want to survive, and it makes you feel happier to get a better grade than having to study and try to do the same thing, right? There's no standard there. There's nothing. So, anyway, these aren't mine. So I think, the devil's advocate that you were looking for, Mike? I mean, here it is from Alex Rosenberg. In fact,
he said better than I could.
I have his book right here, if any of you are interested. I would suggest to you that this is one of the best books on apologetics that you can find for the Christian faith. Is The Atheist Guide to Reality. That's a wonderful book. Also, if you're more interested on worldview, I have some other books here. What's Your Worldview? Written by Dr. James Anderson. This kind of goes through all kinds of different worldviews I didn't address here. You could look at monism, which is what many Hindus hold, that the universe is one, the world is one. Dualism, and these things. And so he kind of walks you through this in a very interactive way. So you kind of select what it is that you're believing, and he tells you what that worldview is and some of the implications. That's a great book. And then another one, from a Christian perspective, by Vern Poythress, called Inerrancy in Worldview. This is another good book on the subject matter. I can tell you more about it if you're interested in worldview. So, anybody else? Yeah.
What is empiricism like? What does that involve?
So empiricism, then, Dr. Rosenberg says his belief is in scientism, and so empiricism is the theory of knowledge that says that all knowledge is gained through the senses. Okay, that's what the empirical method is. There was a philosophical movement that began in the 50s and 60s, maybe a little earlier, called logical positivism. And what the logical positivists said is that for any statement to be meaningful, it had to be empirically verifiable, which means that you had to be able to see it, taste it, touch it, smell it. You had to use your senses. If you could not sense it, then it was not real, and it had no meaning. And so that is the idea behind empiricism, and that's essentially the idea behind scientism. Basically, it's science and tells us everything. That the only things that are real in this universe are things that can be sensed. Does anyone here see a problem with that statement itself? All knowledge comes through senses.
Your cells.
Sorry?
Like your cells. Like cells.
Cells, okay. But you could say you just need better equipment to be able to see that, right? You just need to be able to see a little further in to the nature of the world. Ideas, okay.
Emotions.
Idea concepts.
Emotions. You can't see those, right?
Emotions, okay.
Usually in science they're assuming things too.
Well, but just as a logical proposition, I don't know if you guys have taken any logic classes. Logic, we look at logic, you have logic of quantification and logic of category mistakes, and you have these kinds of logical fallacies. You have informal logical fallacies like speaking. You have formal logic, which is more like mathematics. But when you make a proposition such as all knowledge, okay, that's the word all is included there. Knowledge must come from what? Our senses, right? Meaning we have to see it, taste it, touch it, or smell it. Okay? Now let me ask you all, has anyone here seen all knowledge? Can somebody go down to the cafeteria and grab me a piece? Right? All right, first of all, knowledge is conceptual by nature. Secondly, if your proposition and your theory is that the only way that we gain knowledge is through our senses, well then that statement itself is self-defeating. Because you see, you have not sensed all knowledge. So the case can't be that all knowledge is gained through senses, because if that statement's true, then it's false. Okay, that's one of the problems that you have with the idea of empiricism. And so then you have other philosophers who held to a theory such as Plato, who's probably the most consistent, of dualism, that there's a world of forms, that he called it, or referred to as mind, the unchanging, immaterial, and invariant world where we have things like the concept of beauty. Let me ask you all, when you think of beauty, what do you think about? Anybody? What do you think? What's one thing that comes to mind when you think of beauty?
Nature.
Natural phenomena. Okay, like what? Maybe some young woman?
Yes.
Some young woman, okay. So he's got a concept of beauty, and behind that concept maybe is some young lady, okay? And that's a great example. But you see, Plato would say, what happens to her in 50 years? Does your idea of beauty, that beauty, change, right? Because Plato would say that that concept of beauty, what's happened is that that's changed, and that's no longer the concept of beauty that you have, you see. But he says that there is an enduring world where those ideas, they never change. And in that world is where the true idea of beauty is. And that world is not found here in this world of material. One of the properties of the material world is that it changes, just like in your example of the young girl. Her looks will change. She will change. In fact, every 7 years, our bodies recirculate all the cells that we have. So in terms of material, every 7 years, you're a totally new person. You have totally changed, right, in terms of your biochemistry. But things like logic that we mentioned here, mathematics, right, those things do not change. There's a world that is static and changes. So the dualist would hold that. And so we could look at a whole host of these different kinds of issues, but that's what's meant by empiricism. And that's typically what's meant by the scientific method. So we go out, we set some things, if we want to find out for UPS how much it's going to cost to get this book to Los Angeles, California. They're going to take it, they're going to weigh it, they're going to measure it, and then they're going to give me the calculations of the current postage rates based on it to get out there. They've used empiricism and science in order to do that. Okay, and that's the basic worldview that we have. And the reason it's so popular, especially you have it here on the university, is because it does work. We do science with that. Our senses, we do. But then the question that we have beyond that is, why do we believe that our senses are valid, and how do we justify? Again, there's a justificatory element to all of our beliefs, because if we have beliefs that are unjustified, then at the end of the day, they're arbitrary. Okay? And arbitrary simply means they're just preference, right? And that's not what you do. And that's not why you guys are here in college. You're not here. Hand in a paper. Next week you're asked to write a paper on why you think that Shakespeare is a superior writer to some other writer that you have in literature. And you write this paper, and in the paper you say, well, I just like him better. Right? I just think he's a better writer because he had a longer beard than the other guy I interviewed, and I think that's a valid standard to judge. And they said, well, that's ridiculous. But the point is that that's just being arbitrary. You need to have justifications and reasons. And you need to have justifications and reasons for even things such as laws of logic. Like, what's the justification? What's the justification that the law of non-contradiction, which is unchanging, if you're a materialist and you say that everything is matter, matter changes, what's your justification? And that law is still invalid at all, that contradictions are not true now as they were false just several minutes ago. I mean, if everything is random and everything is changing and everything is in flux, as we're saying, then why don't these things change? Right? If they're just properties of our minds, well, then our minds change, the chemicals in our minds change. I mean, my thoughts change all the time. I get hungry and I have thoughts about what I want to eat day to day and what I want to do. That always changes. But these notions, these concepts, they are immaterial and they do not change. So that's one of the problems we have here. So, good question. Anybody else? Gina, you got anything?
As of most recently, what are some of the new worldviews that have come up?
Well, you know, what's interesting in terms of worldviews, some people don't like this concept. And philosophy, I believe, in large part has abdicated. It's what it was essentially set out to do, which was actually the philosopher's goal, was to actually describe what are these beliefs that constitute and make up a worldview. What is the meta-narrative? What is the story? What answers all these questions? Why are we here? What's purpose? How do we know things and all that? That's what philosophers were trying to do, and that's why you have different schools of philosophy. You have rationalists, you have empiricists, you have others, and they were trying to come up and understand this world and give a cohesive and reasoned account for it. But today, they largely don't do that any longer because they've pretty much abdicated, or many have abdicated that task. And there's for a variety of different reasons. But in terms of new worldviews, I don't know. I mean, but what you'll have here, and certainly on this campus, you have a worldview of relativism. Truth is relative, probably, right? You probably hear that a lot, you know. That might be true for you, but that's not true for me. And that's the idea that truth changes. Again, now, this is something that Plato would have said. That's absurd. Truth cannot change. Because if truth changes, well then, has that statement that truth has changed? Because if the statement that truth has changed, truth has not changed. Right? Well, anyway, you know, that's kind of his point. There must be some things that do not change. And that's and so the relativism that actually Plato railed against in Socrates, there was a school of philosophy called sophistry. And you might hear of that today. The sophists, they would just argue any position. If you paid them, they would argue position. So if you were trying to get some point across, you could hire a sophist, which would, the equivalent today would be a lawyer. And he would go up, and he did not care what it was you were arguing. As long as you paid him, he would go up and use tools of rhetoric. He would go up and with his knowledge of debate and oratory tactics, and he would argue your position. It didn't matter whether it was true, because they said, we could not know truth. Right? Truth changed, truth is relative. So what we'll do is we'll just be pragmatic, and we'll just get some money and live the best we can and do that. And so Plato, among others, was one that said, that's a horrible school because that actually goes against philosophy. The goal of philosophy is to tell us what knowledge is, how we know things, what are the justifications of knowledge, and how it's even possible for us to be philosophers, which they thought was the highest form of really being and reasoning.
Could you revisit the role of evidence in philosophical arguments, formation of views?
Sure. So the role of evidence, that's a good question. So what I've presented to you here today, and in that slide where I talked about Dr. Bonson, I've presented to you a more basic outline, okay? And that's really what I focus on when I look at this. I want to look at the philosophical foundations for these different systems of thought. And when I talk to somebody, I want to talk to them about their system of beliefs and not so much on the evidence, because I believe the evidence is interpreted by these beliefs. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to know someone's worldview. So, you know, whatever they might be, if it's a Buddhist or a Hinduist or a Muslim, what it is that they believe specifically about some of these questions. Where do you think we came from? Why do you think we're here? Do you think we have free will? How do we know what we know? And so I'm going to ask them these questions. How do you determine right or wrong? What's the standards that you use to determine that? And so that's what I want to know first, because from that, I don't need to go through and I don't need to study all the evidence that there is. There are so many different belief systems, as I mentioned last one, that it's not practical. No one has the time to understand all this. There are not many polymaths in this world. A polymath is someone who is an expert in many different fields, okay? We just simply don't have the time. We're limited. So what I want to do is get down to basically the brass tacks, and I want to know, at the end of the day, what is the entire system? What's the foundation of all of this that we can't even know anything? And I want to know what are those preconditions, such as knowledge. In this person that I'm talking to, their system, is knowledge even possible? Because if knowledge is not even possible, then why are we even having a discussion? If he doesn't believe that we can know anything, then there's nothing for me to discuss because he can't think we can know anything. Now, if he doesn't think that we're free to make choices, then I'm not going to, why should I talk to him about anything about ethics and determinations and will? Because he doesn't think that, he thinks at the end we're programmed. We're basically mice on a wheel, and we're just going round and round and round based on the chemical reactions and the sensory input that we have into our brains. So that's the first thing I want to know. Basically, what I want to know is I want to see your credentials that you talk about, the evidence first of all. What's your philosophy of evidence? But I will say this, that there is a lot of evidence. I mean, there is evidence. Obviously, we go out and we can use evidence, and we want to use evidence. But I'm saying that evidence in and of itself will never change someone's underlying positions. Because if I tell somebody, I'm a Christian, and I believe the Bible, and they'll say, oh, brother, you can't, how in the world? I read a Bruce Willis quote. You can go to celebrityatheist.com. First of all, I'll just tell you, if you want to look at atheists, go to read Descartes or read Hume or read some other skeptics that actually thought this through. But please don't go to celebrities that look for philosophy. They're actors. They're in fiction movies. It's not real, and they have writers who are actually smart that write the lines for them. So don't do that. But he said there are people that believe the Bible literally, and had an exclamation point there, and I'm not there. And then that's just arbitrary because I can just go as well turn around and say there are people who do not believe the Bible literally. Those people exist. I mean, what's the point? All he's told me is that he has a different worldview, but he has not argued for it. He's just assumed it. And so I want to find the grounds for that. And anyway, I don't know how I got started on celebrity atheists, but that's kind of the point.
Talk a little bit about the all the like underlying spiritual aspect of this. Like you're talking to someone who doesn't share your worldview. So talk about the spiritual components of this whole discussion, and maybe where the gospel kind of comes into play, and
Yeah.
how we can get there from that initial conversation, kind of what's happening spiritually as we're talking to a non-Christian about these issues.
Well, first of all, that's another reason that the evidence is in and of themselves. I don't go and talk to people about evidence because I can give lots of evidences. And like for example, I believe that there is evidence for the resurrection. I've listened to presentations on that. I think it's historically very good evidence. But you give that evidence to somebody. For example, my brother is very skeptical. I was very skeptical myself. So I'm not saying this, and again, I had this in my opening. It's not like I was born a Christian and I just believe these things from the womb. And I've just been taught this, and I've never examined the world. I went to a very liberal university. I was in the honors program there. I studied anthropology. I studied all these things. I know exactly what the teachings are. So it's not like I'm uninformed, some wild-eyed fundamentalist who's out there who never heard of these things before. So the spiritual aspect, that's why I don't get evidence, because I can give him evidence. And he just reinterprets all the evidence I give him because he doesn't have a worldview that even believes that miracles are possible. So then I need to go to him and I need to address him and say, okay, you believe in some kind of naturalistic explanation for the universe. Then I want to know how you account for the things when he talks about our mother that we share, how she loves us. I want to know how you account for love and what that means from naturalism. Do you mean some kind of biochemical reaction that she has in her brain because of survival programming, that she just wants to keep us both alive? That's what you mean by love? Because I don't think that that's what it means. And if he does, there's other things there we can talk about. So for the spiritual aspect, I don't necessarily talk about evidences. What I do is I want to talk about worldview, and because as part of that, I want to present the Christian worldview. I want to set it apart, as we said there, John 17:17, Jesus said, thy word is true, sanctify them in the truth. That's what that sanctification means. It means to be set apart. And I prefer clarity over agreement. So if someone doesn't share my beliefs, that's fine. But I want them to put theirs on the table, and I'll put mine on the table, and we can be clear about those things, and we can set them apart, okay? And as part of that, I'm going to tell them, like I just did you all here this evening, what mine is, which is basically the Christian worldview of the Bible. So that's the spiritual aspect, and that's the combined. And the Bible tells us that those are the arguments that God works through and uses in order to convert and change people's hearts. Because ultimately, the problem that we have, the disagreement that we have, isn't one over evidence. The Bible tells us it's one over heart. The problem that everyone has is not that they don't have enough information. Romans 1:18 through 23 tells us that everyone knows God. This is what it says. It says everyone knows God. He has given enough light and enough information to everyone that no one is with an excuse. Everyone will be held accountable for the knowledge that they have. And that what they do with the knowledge is that they twist it, turn it, and suppress it in some way so that they end up worshiping and serving the creature, which is self, instead of God. So ultimately, the problem is a heart. They need a change of heart. And that's exactly what's described in John 3:3 when Jesus said, unless one is born from above, and that's reborn, and that's the change of heart. And that is something that we cannot do. No person can change someone's heart. You can talk to them, and I'm not suggesting that we don't give evidences, that we don't be reasonable. 1 Peter 3:15 says that we are to, again, sanctify Christ, set Christ apart as Lord in our heart, and then we are to give reasons, and we do have reasons, and that's what I'm presenting to you here this evening. But ultimately, that is not up to me whether or not somebody's converted. That's up to God does the converting of all of us. I myself would have never become a Christian on my own. It's not humanly possible. That was a work of God. And
Tell us a little bit about your testimony.
I thought I did there at the beginning. I thought I did. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out here this evening, because I did, like I said, went to Georgia State, and I never would have been spending, what is it, 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock on any night, right, coming to a meeting like this. I was self-absorbed. I thought, I believed that's what we're here to do, is serve self, and it's all meaningless and pointless, and why should I spend time with anyone else? Because if that's the case, then I want to try to be consistent with that, and I want to, I've only got so many days. I'm just going to look out for myself and do things to get ahead. So I certainly would have been here, so I appreciate you all being here to talk about that. So, I mean, that's part of my testimony.
When did you become a Christian? I
became a Christian about 5 years ago, maybe 6, yeah. Since then, I've been doing a lot of reading, and that's what I talked about here at the beginning of this presentation, is I really did go and I assessed my foundation. I assessed these things that I had assumed for so long. I wanted to say, is this even possible? That I've assumed so much and I'm not critically analyzed what this is, and I did. So I've just I spent all my free time reading and reading and reading and reading more of this, and then ultimately I finally one day, I couldn't even say the word Jesus before. I thought anybody that said that was foolish, that was ridiculous, that they just needed to go and take some of the classes that I had taught, because it's all been disproven true. Empiricism has proven everything. No one in all my years at the University of Colorado, that's where I went to college, mentioned that empiricism itself is not something that's observed, like I've just told you guys. No one in all my years of being here. And it was just assumed. So, yeah, that's what happened. So I examined all that, and I thought, can this be possible, that all of these people are wrong, and that I was that wrong? And the more I read about it, I said, why wasn't I told any of these things? Why wasn't I even told that there were alternate beliefs like this? That what I've been told that were the answers to life's most basic questions were not as straightforward as I had been presented to me in college. And so, yeah, that's part of it.
What about the guy on the airplane? Yeah, the guy on the plane.
The guy on the airplane. Well, when I was 19, I don't know how much of this testimony I should tell. But
Go on.
when I was 19, I went, and like I said, I lived for myself, and I think I had my father's American Express card, and so what I had done, I'd seen in Rolling Stone magazine that the Red Hot Chili Peppers were playing at the Greek Theater in Hollywood, and I lived here in Atlanta. And I thought, man, that would be fun. We'll go watch the Red Hot Chili Peppers in Hollywood. So I got the card out. I booked a hotel room in West Hollywood. I was 19. And I got plane tickets for my friends. And we flew out there, and I got a rental car. You have to be 25 to rent a car. We figure out how I did that. So I got a rental car, drove around, and spent the weekend out there, and then was flying back. And on the way back, obviously in the flight from LA to Atlanta, it's a long flight, a man was sitting across from me. And after the flight took off, he started making some small talk. And then he started asking me, what some of these basic questions. He says, why do you think that we're here? What do you think the meaning of life is? And I was like, I don't know what this guy's talking about, but I'm trying to just read my whatever in-flight magazine that I had there. And then he said something, and then he asked me something about Jesus. And I thought, oh man, he's not going to talk to me about this. I don't know this guy. And I said, well, listen, before I even considered that, there's Buddhism, there's Hinduism, I heard about Jainism or something, some esoteric Hindu. And I was like, I would have to examine all of these things if I was going to be making an informed decision. I had no intention of doing any of that. I just wanted to stop the conversation. And the guy said to me, well, he said, the Bible says that if this plane were crashed and you were to die holding his beliefs, you would go to hell. And I thought, okay, well, that ended the conversation. I was like, that's it, I'm going to take the rest of the flight back and try not to think about that. And I can't remember what I thought the rest of that flight. I didn't want to talk to the guy. But, years after, and I've told this to people, I've flown a lot. I've sat next to a lot of people. I've talked to them. I don't remember any of the conversations really that I've had with anyone on those flights, except for that man. And I'd always think when I was flying, what if that guy's right? What if that were true? Do I not at least owe it to myself? But of course, I never did. But I would think that. And it wasn't until years later, life circumstances, that I actually decided to assess those foundational beliefs and actually do this inventory. I determined that I wanted to know what it is I believed, and if it could not hold up, then I wanted to be able to justify my beliefs and know what it is that I believe, be, as they say, epistemologically self-conscious. And so I know that's not the way that a lot of Christians are presented, as very simplistic and not well thought through, and they don't have reasons for these things, and they don't have a lot of philosophy, but that's just not the case. So, Daniel, you want to ask me a question? Yeah, sure.
I can't help but think about that thing that you mentioned, what you studied in school, and what that plays looks like. Did that solidify anything your study of anthropology?
Yeah, so that was some of the things that I thought about. I had taken classes, I had several classes in anthropology. I had classes in one of them was several classes in primate behavior. And when I started reading some of the books that actually gave a different interpretation, one, I never heard that there even was such a view in any of my classes, which if you're really going to be academically honest, then you would at least try to present what some of the other ideas are. I never heard that, so I didn't know. And I had been taught that this was, just basic fact. And so when I read it, and I remembered that when I would see the presentations like this in my classes, they would always, when they put up Lucy, the bones, and then they did the forensic analysis of the, supposedly the link between humans and apes. They always made that the best looking ape I'd ever seen. And then when they put up a person on the other split screen, it was always the ugliest person that I'd ever seen, right? And so when you look at that and say, oh yeah, I can kind of see the resemblance here. They kind of do look alike, right? And that's where they started. But they never, in any of those presentations, put a rock on one side of the screen and then a human being on the other, right? They never put some inanimate object, material, and decided to proceed to tell me how the inanimate, the non-living organism came into living, thinking, material, cellular organism. They never do that. That's just a bit of a problem there. So things like that I thought about, or I read about, and I thought, why is that? You're basically making the case from the easiest position possible. But if you hold to that worldview, you cannot start there. You have to start all the way at the beginning and work your way up. And of course, if you want to say, we don't have all the answers yet, we're working on it, well then, that's one of the things Daniel's talking about. Daniel's in the graduate program in what, Daniel? Chemistry? Chemistry. And you have a whole host of beliefs that you hold on faith, okay? And that's just one of the few that you hold here. But like I've said, these presuppositions, these are things that we hold that are assumed and without justification. Most. Now, I will say that a Christian does have a justification for the laws of logic. Colossians 2:3 says that all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden in Christ to save. Why can I be rational? Genesis 1:27 says that we were made humans in the image of God, being rational creatures, and that we were made to make choices, that our choices were free, not determined, and that we are accountable for those actions. I make sense of all those, right, in the Bible. So I have a foundation and a justification for those things.
You kind of answered a little bit my question. I wanted to ask, how would you address the question of evolution in the Big Bang theory based on Christian worldview?
How would I respond to the theory of evolution? Well, first of all, the theory of evolution, that's nothing new. The Greeks held, Heraclitus was a Greek philosopher, and he said you never step in the same river twice. And what he meant by that is that it's changed. Each time you go in the river, you step. The matters, the atoms behind it, they've changed. Everything isn't changing. Everything is in flux. And so, again, I would say, the first thing I would say, well, if everything is changing, does truth change? Can truth change? Is truth perishable? Are these laws of thought changing? Is our human responsibilities or personal freedoms determined or free? So that's the questions I would ask, How do we account for things that do not change? How do we account for things that are universal, right? Like laws of thought. So if you're asking me more in a scientific sense to, what the problems are scientifically with evolution, well, I would point to some books, maybe Mike knows some books on, just talking about some of the difficulties. Darwin's Black Box, I think, is one of that. And that gets specifically into evidence of irreducible complexity. And again, now you're down to evidence. But I say before you even go to the evidence, you need to tell us about the philosophy of evidence. And in your worldview, is it even possible to have knowledge? Because doesn't science presuppose knowledge is possible? If not, doesn't the word science mean scientia, knowledge? Is that not what you're doing when you say you're doing the scientific method? I'm a software engineer, guys. I came up here after working today, and that's what I do during the day. But all day long, I'm assuming laws of thought. I'm assuming rational constructs. I'm assuming that there are things that are immaterial that I'm using that are going to be working tomorrow in the same fashion that they were today. I'm not going to assume that all the laws of physics are going to change overnight, because if they did, then we couldn't even do science. Some of these things, they're necessary. So first I would say there, how do we make sense of that? Given your worldview, what is the justification for me to even go and do my work on computers and those things? So I don't know if that's what we're looking for, Daniel, but
Because everything's changing, evolving.
well, if that's what you believe, that the universe is constantly changing and everything is random and chance, then how do we account for laws?
2 + 2 = 4. How's that always the same?
Well, there's, there are laws of mathematics, right? Do they change?
Yeah.
If they do, I would say you can't do science.
Do we have anything else? Will everyone give Lance a round of applause?